Well, thank you all. Thanks, Rosenberg. Thanks to the Rosenberg Forum for having me. And I'm very glad of sharing my views on the Paraná Delta, and I hope that part of my love for the Delta here in Vietnam. So first, let me introduce the Delta. The Paraná River is originated in Brazil and joins the Paraguay River. And at the last 300 kilometers, it forms a delta which flows into the Del Plata River. The La Plata River is a freshwater estuary, so we don't have here the problem of salt intrusion. And the delta itself has a relatively low population, but it's really close to the larger cities of Argentina, the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires, which is our federal district, and Rosario City. So we call all the area the Paraná Delta, but if we relate to its geomorphic history, the area has a modern delta that has growing islands into the estuary, and also an ancient delta in the middle area, which was formed during the Holocene when the sea level was higher than present. In the upper delta, there are fluvial landforms, and also in the northeast, we have littoral beach reefs and tidal plains that are a record of the past history of the past marine history. The delta has a really high biodiversity because of the role of the Paraná River itself that acts as a corridor, growing species from 3 different ecoregions and flowing from tropical regions to this temperate area. This high heterogeneity my view is that it needs to be recognized in any land use planning. And in the area, there had been several efforts defining wetland landscapes since the late 90s. And we have revisited these landscape units this year. Our view is to involve the hydrological patterns, the geomorphic patterns, and the ecological patterns to define these landscape units. Also, what is really important for the area is that the population within the delta is diverse. We have in the frontal delta a higher population density than in the middle and in the upper delta. And most of the local people, the islanders, or we call them isleños, lack from basic services, meaning education, access to education, to power outage, healthcare, access to environmental justice, land tenure, mainly in the middle and upper delta. The first picture is showing an example of what Laurel introduced, a project of co-producing knowledge in the frontal delta, in which the researchers and PhD students from our institute were collaborated with islanders on a potabilization project, and there they are working on the assessment of water quality. So the main challenge for the governance of the delta is the presence of several jurisdictions. In Argentina, the provinces are the ones that keep the jurisdiction on the natural resources. So here in the delta, we have 3 different provinces, and they may differ in their regulation. For example, in fishing limits, or in the presence of environmental agencies, or even on the views they have on the sustainable use of the delta. We also have 3 national parks, which gave jurisdiction to the nation. And these parks, 2 of them are located in the upper delta, within the Ramsar site, Delta del Paraná, and the last one is located in the lower delta. The protected areas have different levels of enforcement, so that is also part of the complexity of the area. Well, in the last 12 years, in my country, there was a big discussion on a project of wetland law. This project would would create a law setting the minimum standards for environmental protection of the wetlands all over the country, not only for the deltas or for the floodplain systems, but due to the presence of the Paraná Delta really nearby the main cities, and probably because the area was undergoing extreme wildfires during the discussion of the law, several NGOs and the civil society pressure on the Delta governance needs in particular. So this is part of the last text, unified text of the law, which couldn't be sanctioned. The last attempt was in 2022, and now the debate is really frozen. And one of the relevant articles of the law is the presence of the development of a national wetland inventory. So even if the law wasn't sanctioned, several pilot projects on wetland inventories were conducted, and in our institute we work specifically in the Delta, in the Paraná Delta, creating products of wetland inventory at several spatial scales. This methodology was being discussed with the government agencies, the former Environmental Ministry, which now is dissolved, and with NGOs and researchers. So we have defined wetland regions for all the country, wetland landscape system for the Paraguay and Paraná river corridors, wetland landscape units, and finally, for the Ramsar site in the Delta, the wetland units. So this inventory takes into account the hydrogeomorphic approach, and it should be used for the next planning uses. Well, now I want to share some of the effects of decisions that are taken in other territories rather than the Delta, and that have ripple effects in the Delta. One of these ripple effects is the expansion of agriculture areas, mainly due to the release of genetic modified organisms, mainly soybean, in the late 90s. So the production of commodities, soybean commodities in the highlands displaced cattle to the Delta. And this involved a process of terrestrialization of the Delta, meaning that we have increasing diking practices to intensify the livestock production. Also, other effect is the runoff of agrochemicals from the crops on the highland, and also because of the increasing exportation of commodities, there is a pressure on the deepening of the channel in the Paraná channel in the project, the so-called project Hidrovia. The Hidrovia project is an international project involving 5 nations that involves the use of the Paraná River to transport commodities from Brazil, Paraguay, Uruguay, Argentina, and Bolivia to the Del Plata River and to the ocean. The pressure is on deepening the channel, and we have concerns regarding riverbank erosion. Threatens to access of safe drinking water and also to fishery. Also, sorry, there is a tension between the view of the river as a highway and not as a living system. And this threatens the identity of the Paraná River. Another example of a ripple effect is the sand extraction on the delta because of the pressure of shale oil extraction or a fracking project very long, very far away from the delta in the Patagonia, which is more than 1,300 kilometers from the area. So the Paraná Delta is nowadays the largest supplier of silica sand for this pressure venue, and this is threatening the riverbanks where grow some of the more mature biodiverse forests, and also it's threatening the islands that are a record of the past marine history I told you about. So as in other deltas, the hydroclimatic variability is very important, and the dynamics of the area are, I think, that are a great value for the area and is recognized as a conservation value in the protected areas. The Paraná River has the different flood posts, and it's not their dynamics is not so seasonal as in other systems, but it depends on the El Niño and La Niña events. Well, also on the lower delta, we have some influence of tidal influence from the Del Plata River. So this is a picture of a moment with high water levels. You can see that great part of the floodplain is underwater. And this causes isolation of the local inhabitants, loss of domestic animals and cattle, loss of households. Depending on the effectiveness of the flood alert system, but our National Institute of Water, there had been losses of the animals, the cows that need to be transported to highlands, and also the highlands are not as, several times has not been enough to keep all the cows. Also, there is a limited number of barges to transport the cattle, and in the frontal area, in the last flood peak related to the tidal, have been they have been several weeks without power, and the people there is the first pic, the second picture, they are demonstrating in the river. On the other hand, they are in the low water periods, there can be really severe and extreme droughts. And in fact, this is the situation we are handling now. We have been in a really dry period since 2020, and we haven't recovered yet from this drought. This picture shows the middle section in the middle delta, and you can see that most of the floodplain is dry. The lakes have a very reduced area. Only part of the native forests are green, and here you can see smoke from a nearby fire. So in this, in 2020, 2021, 2022, the people were isolated because of the fires. and because of the rivers and streams were really dry. In the frontal delta, we also have cyanobacterian blooms. And regarding the ecological point of view, the loss of aquatic habitats and the loss of connectivity between the lakes and the rivers has impacted on the aquatic biodiversity. And in particular, we have very extended wildfires. In 2020, more than a quarter of the delta was burned, and this overpassed the previous great wildfires that were in 28, when almost 9% of the delta was on fire. The alarm on the media regarding these fires began when the big cities like Rosario here were covered in smoke, and people were worried about their health. And due to the presence of several jurisdictions, there was really big difficulties to get to do coordinated actions, and only 15% of the actions were coordinated between the nation and the 3 provinces. Although I know that they took really great efforts on fight the fires, the local inhabitants claimed for help and for assistance after the fires. And as an example of adaptive governance, especially during the first phenomenon of extended fires in 2028, a forum called PIECAS was formed. PIECAS means Comprehensive Strategic Plan for the Conservation and Sustainable Use of the Paraná Delta, and this is a regional forum involving the nation, the 3 provinces, and the municipalities that have sovereignty in the area. So the PIECAS was effective for coordinating actions in 2028. Then it didn't continue to work. And in 2020, when the new fires occurred, the PIECAS was reactivated due to the mandate of the justice. So although it was very effective during the emergency, there is a lack of transcending work after the emergency occurs. And I think that this type of regional forums are really necessary to handle or to plan actions, not only because of the fire, but also due to other large-scale issues and long-time environmental issues. For example, the creation of major infrastructure projects or fishery rules. Other maybe challenge of these forums is the participation of local people. In the forums here, in these networks, one of the big squares is the PIECAS, and here remains 2 years after. And the local inhabitants were not really participating, maybe only in a specific single events workshops of the PIECAS or of NGOs. Regarding fishing, well, this picture shows a workshop led by an NGO, Wetlands International, Argentina. And in this workshop, the fishermen with the researchers conceptualized the term fishing territory. They mean that for their activity, not only the river or the lake are important, but also the coast, the floodplain where the fish develop most of the part of their biological cycle. And this view helps to take into account all the possible impacts, not only in the river, but in all the fishing territory. One of these impacts on fishery is the digging practices. Nowadays, the 14% of the delta area is digged, and in the past, dikes were used to for forestation projects like Saglis at Pompulus forestations, but in the recent years, there had been a lot of digging unregulated, really decided by the landowners that have the resource to dig, and then they impact on the neighbors that don't have the opportunity to create their own digs. And this, the aim of these dikes were related to urban projects and also illegal agricultural polders. And to share a positive case, our National Institute of Agropecuary Technology, the INTA, has presence in the area for the last almost 70 years. And it has been promoting several productive activities of families and small-scale producers, such as silvopasture, forest, harbor, wicker production. We also have bulrush production in the area. And they have also been involved in a deer conservation project that is led by the INTA and researchers. So, in short, there are multiple jurisdictions in the area, diverse stakeholders, and this arises socio-environmental conflicts, mainly with when external stakeholders come to the Delta with views that are not in line with the traditional uses of the area. The eco-hydrogeomorphic approach needs to be taken into account. I have mentioned the ripple effects from upland decision stakes in highlands. I have not deepened on this, but the reduced budgets, nowadays we are facing reduced budgets for environmental programs and science programs, and this impacts on the Delta. And my view is that we need to preserve the Delta, protect its identity, and protect the common goods to guarantee the well-being of the people of the Delta. Thank you.